Join Jesus where he's already at work. We dream of the day where every home in America is adopted by one or more persons living the prayer, care, share lifestyle. Our host, Gary Kendall, began Love KC with the desire to see every home in Kansas City prayed for. Join with him to make this happen. Now, on to the Blessed Podcast.
Well, welcome to the Blessed Podcast, where we join Jesus, where he's already at work, where we live, learn, work, and play. And we're coming to you live today on Facebook at our Facebook group, Love KC Today, Living on Mission, and also on iTunes and Google Play. And we're excited to have Dave Runyon with us today. Welcome, Dave.
It's great to be here, Gary and Brooke.
Yeah, I can't hardly wait to get into some of your stories and to learn more about what you do and the path you've been on to get to where you are. Brooke, always glad to do these podcasts with you. Thank you.
Always great to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, you can always look after we do a podcast, Brooke will write a blog and be able to glean some of the things that you might hear today, and you can have them for later use. So
if you're not on our email list, you can go to lovekc.net and sign up to receive those emails.
You beat
Good
me
plug.
to it.
Nice work.
Yes, yeah, perfect. Way to go. So Dave, I haven't ever had a chance to tell you this, but I pastored for almost 40 years. And toward the end of my pastorate, I really felt like God was leading me into a season where I would focus on evangelism, discipleship, and prayer as the primary, like whatever God does in the future, that would be the primary path, and led me into the creation of a citywide ministry eventually. But part of me getting to that place was reading your book, The Art of Neighboring. And I actually read it twice. So the first time I was working out and listened to it, and it really inspired me a lot. And I thought, that is so good. I'm going to go back and read it like in paper so I can go slowly and mark it up. And I thought it was just tremendous. It had a real motivating effect on me to say, yeah, I want to give the rest of my life to this focus. I'd already felt God's call that direction, but it helped me to, I think, have a little more laser approach to neighboring as the primary way I wanted to see prayer, evangelism, and discipleship play out. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks for the encouraging words, Gary. When Jay and I wrote the book almost 10 years ago, we thought it's going to be nice. Our moms are going to put it on their bookshelf and they'll point to it and they'll tell people that their kids, look at my son did. He wrote a book. We had zero clue, mostly because it's just so simple. I mean, nothing we're doing is rocket science. It's just really, really simple. And so it's been a whirlwind to kind of see where things have gone over the last 10 or so years and to see where they continue to go.
So exciting.
So cool. Yeah. Before we get into your backstory, Dave, do you mind telling us about your family and what you're doing today?
Yeah. So I served as a pastor for 10 years here in the Denver metro area. Then the book and some stuff that I was passionate about with business owners took off. And so 10 years ago, I started working full-time leading a nonprofit called City Unite. And we help faith and government and business leaders work together in the city. And so Gary and I have run into each other at different city leader type organizations and movements. And so my work's in many ways similar to what you guys are doing with Love KC. And so I'm a big fan of city movements and of church unity, and I've given a large part of my life to that. And so my wife and I live here. We're situated right between the mountains and downtown Denver.
I feel so sorry for you.
in Arvada, Colorado. Well, at least you guys, for the most part, and this year's been, at least you guys have the Chiefs. I'm sitting here watching the Broncos, and they have the same record right now, I think, but there is a vast difference in where those two teams are probably going to end up by the end of the year. So yeah, but I do have the mountains and all kinds of other cool stuff. But yeah. So anyway, so we have 4 kids. 3 teenagers and 1 12-year-old. So we're all over the place.
Oh boy.
You have an active household.
Yes, we do.
So one of the first things that really caught my attention, Dave, was the diagram. And I thought, wow, that's really practical, really simple. How'd you get that idea?
You know, that I'm going to give credit to Jay on that one. Jay had started to, even before we had the whole conversation with the mayor and all that kind of stuff, Jay had this tic-tac-toe board illustration that he was using to just really make it concrete of what it means to love your neighbor. And then we started doing some work with some of the city leaders and trying to think about how could we start a neighboring movement in our city. And then we turned it into a refrigerator magnet. And to be honest with you, Gary, that little block map is the secret sauce to everything that happened in our city. The book's fine, but the block map was everything, because it was just a very simple tool and kind of gave people a scorecard of like, hey, can you retain your neighbors' names? And for me, that was powerful. I think I have it right here. So those of you that are watching on Facebook, you can see it. Whoops, I'm on a fake background, so it's disappearing. But anyway, if you're just listening, you just kind of think about a tic-tac-toe board where your house is in the middle, and then you just think about if you live in a condo, a ranch, an apartment complex, a single family home, no matter who you are, you have neighbors. And the little exercise that really turned my life upside down and really made a huge difference in our city was just inviting people to go and to have face-to-face conversations with people when they don't know their name. It's mildly awkward. It was mildly awkward for me when my neighbors who I'd met 3 times and lived next to for 18 months, and I had to go over and kind of eat crow and just say, you know what, I forgot your name. I know I've met you a number of times, but just do, and I could have gone online and looked it up, or I could have gone on Nextdoor, but there's something special and sacred about a face-to-face interaction, especially one in which somebody's saying, hey, I should probably know your name, but I don't. And just, having a series of conversations like that is the starting place for neighboring. And then to write those down, that the block map was so key, because we just asked people to write down their neighbors' names and to put it in a place where it was visible. And for me, God just did something in my heart. Like all of a sudden, those names of those people, I just found myself using their names a lot when I saw them. I found myself praying for them and thinking about them and being curious about their lives. And so for me, the block map was it's the beginning and the end. So much of doing this is just momentum. And so I had met all my neighbors before. They just weren't important enough for me to remember their names. And coming face to face with that, and I mean, I was a pastor, I'm a professional Christian, like I'm like, I mean, I don't like that word actually, but I'm like making my living.
Paid to be good.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah, well, but I'm making my living by helping people orient their lives around the teachings of Jesus. And the most basic teaching is love God with everything you have, heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I was doing all kinds of loving my neighbor with not sitting on the boards of nonprofits and being involved in different ministries, and all the stuff I was doing at my church was clearly loving my neighbor. But I just kind of drifted into a place where all of that somehow sprinkled magic fairy dust over my actual neighborhood. And I just pretended, or I didn't even pretend, subconsciously, I just was like, well, I'm doing all kinds of loving your neighbor. Jesus wasn't talking about the people who are sleeping 30 feet away from me. And just when I say it out loud, you realize how dumb it is. But coming face to face with that and starting to make time to connect with the people that God's placed right around me just ended up making a huge difference in my life. And it just rejuvenated my heart. The real reason I got into ministry was to hang out with people that think different, not just hang out with people in my same Christian silo, but to spend time with people who think about the world and about God differently than I do. And so it was a gift. It was a gift to me on so many different levels.
So good.
That's so cool, Dave. When I go around town, I live in Olathe, Kansas, a suburb of Kansas City, and I still see those diagrams in different churches and different people's homes. And it's so fun to see it and think how simple, how transferable, how scalable that one idea is. I was doing some teaching in China a couple of years ago and got an opportunity to speak at a Chinese church that was in the heart of Macau, kind of just south of Hong Kong, and kind of the Las Vegas of China. And so they wanted to know, they had been asked, I had been there multiple times. They were wondering what I was doing these days since I wasn't a pastor anymore. So I was able to kind of combine both things to talk about Love KC and neighboring as our strategy, and also how that they could do, how they could live a pray, care, share lifestyle. And I used your diagram because most of them live in high rises, and they don't have something like Bless Every Home, of course, and China. And so the diagram worked perfectly. And I just had them all draw it. Like the fun part about it was I let them realize I don't know my neighbors, and they actually live like not a yard away, one door away, or one floor away.
Yeah.
And that was pretty eye-opening to them.
Yeah, and for those of you that live in multi-unit places, there's great pros and cons for that. Some people would think, oh, if you live in an apartment, of course you're gonna know all your neighbors and do all. And the truth is, a lot of people that live in apartments, it tends to be like they just want to get into their place, and it's kind of like their refuge. And then you've got all kinds of noise issues with shared walls and all kinds of stuff like that you've got to navigate. And so there's some more. It tends to be more transient in condos and apartment complexes. So those are the downsides. But the gifts being like having shared spaces, whether it's just a place outside where there happens to be a grill or a lobby where you can hang out and host a monthly, card night or whatever it might be, or some of these places have pools and all kinds of stuff. And so I encourage people that are living in multi-unit to think and pray about, how does God want to use the shared space in your place? And maybe you don't have any shared space. Maybe it's just the parking lot. Well, those are great places to bring out a couple of grills and throw something on there. And pregame, you can have a tailgate before, and then and then a few of you go back, have one neighbor over and watch the Chiefs game and barely beat the Giants on Monday night, and scratch your heads wondering what in the world's going on with this team. But do that together instead of just everybody tends to just go into those same places and do the same thing at the exact same time. And so there's all kinds of small things that you can do that make a big difference when it comes to neighboring.
Yeah,
that's very true.
At the beginning of your book, you tell a story about a meeting with the mayor and how it rocked the church community. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, that was convicting. We were doing the city thing and bringing all kinds of pastors and leaders together, and we would have these community conversations we'd bring in the police chief or the city manager, and we were with our mayor, and we just asked him that question of, if you could wave a magic wand and mobilize all of the people that we lead in our churches around one thing, what would it be? And he started with the stuff that you might imagine: single moms living below the poverty line, or homelessness, or financial debt. And then at the end, it was kind of a throwaway line. He just said, if you guys want to make the biggest difference in our city, you should start some kind of a neighboring movement. And he said, because what we know is that when people are connected to their neighbors, it takes all kinds of weight off of the systems that the government is trying to create for people in need.
Wow.
And Brooke, we're all sitting there going, God's using our mayor to tell us to do the Bible. And then we had to have some honest conversations as pastors around the room. And of the 26 pastors that were sitting around that table, there's about 4 of them that were actually being intentional in their own neighborhood. And I was not one of them. And so it was a real learning curve for us to just start to do small things in our neighborhood that make, I used to just come home and I was just trying to come home and go, all right, I've worked probably longer than I should. Let's just try not to be awful at being a dad and a husband, And so I just had this kind of mentality of I just go and focus everything. And that's important. I don't want to diminish that. But there's just there's so many gifts sitting right outside our front doors. And it was embarrassing for me that I'd been a pastor for a decade and had never really thought about a theology of place right outside my door. And as any of the faith leaders that are listening to this know, or even if you're not a faith leader, the Old and New Testament is just filled with this rich, deep theology of place. And I think because many of us are transient and because of technology and different things, a lot of us have just lost that. And so for me, it was about rediscovering. The art of neighboring is what it really became about.
I love that. Dave, I was with Brian Alred, who founded America Prays.
Yeah.
not too long ago, and he had recently gone on a trip where he was in the Muslim world, and he was talking to them about neighboring, because one of the things that America Praise has done is partner with Bless Every Home, like in Austin, to see every neighborhood adopted in the city. And so Brian's telling this story to a man who works primarily with Muslims, and and he's really leaning into the part about being a neighbor, being a good neighbor, loving your neighbor like yourself. And the man who works with Muslims looked over and he goes, "That would work here." And he goes, "Well, what do you mean? Tell me what you're thinking." He goes, "Well, in the Muslim world, in the Quran, a Muslim is supposed to love the neighbors that are closest around them. So they number 7 families, the 7 families closest around them. They're supposed to love them like a neighbor and care for them. Now, after 7, they can punch them in the nose or feel however they want about them. But 7 is the number, and they're supposed to treat them like a neighbor. So I thought of your diagram, because that's basically what your diagram is. But I thought, how cool is that this idea from God translates even into other religions. They may not even know anything about what the Bible says about neighboring, but they name 7 neighbors.
Yeah. Wow, that's neat. We have 8 on our diagram, so I guess that makes us one. No, and I think the loving your neighbor thing, it's a core tenet in Christianity and in a number of other, faith traditions as well. And so I think and this is what's been interesting when we've worked with cities. So my real heart is bringing churches and helping faith communities come together around this. But every once in a while, a city will call us, and we'll go down and work with a city and to help them think through starting a neighboring movement in their community, and how might they be able to use some of the Christians there, and then some of the Jewish people will kind of pop up, and we'll meet rabbis. And so it's something that I think our world is thirsty for right now.
Yeah.
On a number of levels.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the human condition, desires community. We're made for it.
Yeah, we have a deep sense of belonging. And I just know this from my own experience. When when I know my neighbors, and it's so much different to drive into my neighborhood, the feeling I get inside when I drive into my neighborhood, and these are people that I'm doing life with, is so much different than when you just have one of those neighborhoods where everybody's kind of isolated and the garage door goes up and the garage door goes down. Or the worst case is when you've got a conflict with somebody in your neighborhood and you just drive by and you just get a pit in your stomach because there's tension there. I think we all have a deep sense and a desire for belonging. And I think our neighbors do, regardless of where they're at on their journey with God. A lot of our neighbors are craving this. Some of my neighbors aren't. Some of my neighbors, I learned their name and they're just really busy. And when I lean towards them, they don't lean back. And I've learned not to stalk them. So I want to give a professional tip to all of you out there. Your job isn't to become best friends with all of your neighbors, no matter what happens. There's this great thing in Luke 10 about the person of peace. And I think, Jesus is encouraging the disciples as they go out to look for people of peace, and where they see people of peace to stay there and to lean into those. And I think that's true in our neighborhoods as well.
It could be a timing issue too, to keep praying for those people. I mean, you never know when they're going to need some more relationship in their life, or something could come up, but at least you've made the effort. So they like, oh, this person is really made some effort. Yeah. And if there's anything that's come out in the last year and a half, it's that people need to not be isolated and they need relationship.
Yeah. COVID really put the spotlight on our neighboring relationships, and it created a lot of great soil for our neighborhood, because people weren't going to school, they weren't going to work as much, they weren't going to church as much, and so but we were seeing so many more people out walking and just visible. And I think that's been across the country, and so it's created a lot of great opportunities for people just to go, hey, what's your name, and you start seeing them on a more regular basis and having more and more connection points with them.
Yeah, we had an interesting thing happen, and I'll be careful with the details here. In our neighborhood, a week and a half ago, there was a man that got injured working outside in his backyard, And immediately it was amazing to see how all the neighbors rallied around it. It was one of those kinds of things where 911 came, police cars, fire trucks, the whole 9 yards. And neighbors from both sides of their house came to help. Neighbors from down the street, someone came to take care of the kids so the mom could go to the hospital, and she was originally going to go in the ambulance, and then another neighbor actually drove her. Like, all these different, there was like 5 jobs to do or more, and like neighbors were just everybody piling in to help. And by God's grace, it turned out amazing. I think it was miraculous, the way that this man was able to recover, which I think to some degree maybe have been an answer to prayer. But what was just a total blast is like a week later, Halloween comes, and all of those neighbors, there's about 4 houses in a row, they all have small kids about the same age. And they had this kind of like a block party, and the next door neighbor decorated their yard, and all the neighbors came over. This young man that got injured couldn't, but his wife was there with the 3 kids. And then they all went down through the neighborhood trick-or-treating together in a big crowd and celebrating. I mean, everybody knew that this was a miraculous thing, that he was okay. Wow. And I just thought, wow, that's a beautiful picture of neighboring right there.
Oh, I love it. And my experience has been that in the greatest times of growth among connections in our neighborhood have been around crisis. One happened around somebody's house getting broken into and a lot of stuff getting stolen, and how the neighbors came together in a whole new way, more, deeper ways, shared all of our information, really just said, let's stack hands and look out for each other, look out for each other's homes. We had we had tragic suicide on my little loop, and just the way the other family showed up, whether it was to the funeral and walking with the wife, was just potent. It was just powerful. And then another one was with a family that was just really struggling with one of their kids, and all of those, I just look back and I look at what an incredible season of growth that was for just deeper connections and doing life together and feeling bonded together. So I think I wouldn't wish a crisis on anybody, but I will also say don't waste a crisis in your community.
That's really good. I love that. You've been neighboring for 10 years now, right? It's been about.
I mean, I've intentionally, my wife's been doing it for longer because she's ahead of me on most things.
At least you can acknowledge that. So I'm just curious, like, what are some of the surprises that you found on this journey of neighboring?
I'm just surprised at the gifts that are sitting, in the houses that live around me, and the more I learn people's stories and the things that they're passionate about, and the types of religious, and faith experiences they've had growing up, that's one of my favorite questions to ask people, and not to like lead with this when you're getting their name, but to just go, hey, like, tell me, like, have you had any weird experiences with Christians, like, over the years? And a lot of times I'm like, oh yeah, let's go. How much time do you have? And just being able to allow people to just voice some of those things is really helpful. Or just simply just asking, like, hey, did you guys grow up in any kind of faith tradition? Did you grow up going to church or anything like that? Those are like little small questions that I'm not trying to put people on their back foot and just saying, hey, like, do you know if you died today, do you know where you'd go? And God can use that. I don't want to say that that's not good, but just working with, learning people's stories is really important. And a lot of times part of people's stories is their relationship to the faith community, and just being the type of people that can learn those and be curious. And I'm not just talking about that stuff. I'm also asking them, like, hey, what did you if you could go back 10 years and raise your kids, from the time they were 10 on, like where mine are, what would you tell me? What do you wish you would have done differently? Or how did you, how'd you get into this vocation? Like, how did you end up as an engineer? Like, so I'm not just trying to, like, lead my neighbors down the road with faith questions. I'm just trying to get to know them as a whole person.
That's awesome.
And I've seen a lot of fruit from that. I've seen a lot of they have curiosity back. They get curious about my relationship with faith and God and all that. So It's been fun.
It's really good.
That's very cool, Dave. When I was with you a couple of weeks ago in LAR Ranch in Colorado, you were talking about a new tool that you had found, and in fact, you brought some with you that night.
Oh yeah,
from OtterBox. So talk a little bit about that tool.
yeah. It's yeah, and they're actually not. It's some of the OtterBox people are doing a lot of the fulfillment, and it's one of their kids. But it was really simple. In fact, if you want to go and get one of these, they're free, or you get a dozen or more of these, they're free. And it's at plusnothing.com. And it's the Gospels integrated. So just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but chronological. And it's really well done. It just looks like a little journal or something. But I've just been able to invite people that I went to high school with that have zero interest in faith stuff. That just be able to say, hey, like, listen, I know you're not into religion, but this is like just the life and teachings of Jesus. Would you consider just reading this and then letting me know what you think? And so it's kind of, it's just a low level entry into like thinking about how Jesus talked about living. Again, those are at plusnothing.com. I don't make anything from that. Actually, they're all free, so nobody's making any money. So I'm not trying to go get you to do something that's going to benefit me. It's just benefited me because it's been a great tool. It's worth checking out. It's worth just ordering a few of them and seeing what you think. But I've been encouraging people to take 2 of them, read one themselves, and to think about, is there somebody in your life? Is there a neighbor? Is there somebody at work? Is there a friend that you might be willing to hand this to, and just to invite them to consider reading it, and then to grab a cup of coffee to debrief it?
Yeah. No, I love that idea. My wife and I, we bought some for our neighbors, and are going to use them over the holidays and hand them out, and just talk about, hey, I'd love to have a conversation with you about this and explain what it is. I think people are suspicious of religion, but if they have relationship, I think they're curious about Jesus. I
Agreed.
find that I can have conversations about Jesus. Who do you think he was? What is anything stand out about him to you? How do Christians today look different than what you picture Jesus might look like? Those are all conversations you can have, especially if they're open-ended and you're not trying to shoehorn them into some, presentation at the end of it or something.
Well, and I think that is true. I wish wouldn't it be great if people had the same impression of Jesus as they do with Christians?
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people in our culture that have had hard experiences. They've had hard experiences with Christians, right? They found somebody to be hypocritical, or and so I think that's a great prayer. Is would people's openness to Jesus and Christians begin to become closer and closer? Would that become more and more in alignment? I'm going to start praying for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, people are open. They're open to they think about Jesus, and there's a real openness, I find, to learning more about him.
Yeah. There's always a danger when we talk about tools in my mind, because one of the things I try to get people to think about all the time is, tools can be helpful, but tools also can box you in if you're not careful. And so I like to talk about the mindset or the lifestyle of a person who's, just constantly kind of aware that any day with God might lead them to some place they couldn't imagine, and to be open to the graces of God all around them. So can you talk a little bit about the mindset maybe, or the lifestyle nature of neighboring?
Yeah. Well, I just think I try to encourage people to think about this isn't like an evangelism strategy. This is a practice. This is a discipline.
Right.
This is a practice that Jesus has invited us into. And the irony is that when people start with it, it's an evangelism strategy. I don't think it produces great fruit. But when people think about this as like, even if my neighbor never comes to know God or never takes another step towards God, the command to love our neighbors still stands.
Right.
And when we go into that mentality, our neighbors don't feel like projects. They don't feel like targets. They feel like friends. I think Tim Keller, I think I heard Tim Keller say this once. Jesus said, I don't know if I like this word, like friendship evangelism. I think I just like friendship. And I was like, yeah, I like that.
I like that a lot.
And the assumption is too, we share the things that we love with any of our friends. They know the things that we love. So it doesn't mean we don't talk about our faith life, or it doesn't mean we're trying to hide that from people or not, but it means that when we're pursuing relationships, we get curious about other people's stories and they get curious about ours. And that, I think, that's the soil where amazing things happen, especially in our culture right now when so many people have so much baggage around, Christian. It was weird I was a pastor in my neighborhood, and I just noticed a lot of people they were starting to wait. They're like, okay, when are you going to try to do some weird thing to me? And, and so
they didn't want to end up as a sermon illustration, did they?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Or end up on a podcast.
And so instead they just ended up in a book. Yeah, they ended up in a book. So, so it was fun. One of my neighbors, he's probably taught me more about neighboring than anybody, and he just sits in his driveway and has a lot of margin in his life, and there's always plenty of beverages at his place. And so I felt weird when I started writing the book. I was like, oh man, these guys are going to find out about this. I was going to change this. So I took it down to him. I just said, hey man, will you just read? I'm like, my buddy and I had the same with the mayor. We're kind of writing our story. I've learned a lot from you. Would you just read through this and see if there's any weird stuff in here that says like Christianese stuff that you make you uncomfortable or that doesn't make sense to you? So he now likes to think of himself as the editor of the book. So that got me over a lot of awkwardness.
That's great.
Yeah.
Are you doing it? Oh, go ahead, Gary.
No, go ahead, Brooke.
No, you go.
Okay. So I just had a fun story recently. You know how a lot of times, Dave, we invest in relationships. And if you're like me, and I think you are in this way, that I really am trusting God to direct where these relationships go and the timing and what we talk about, et cetera. So I'm not pushing an agenda. I feel like I'm more like patiently waiting and looking for the fingerprints of God, to show up somewhere. But I was working for 2 years after I left Indian Creek at Puckspod. It was a co-working space. And so there was maybe 8 or 9 other groups of people there, maybe 20, 25 individuals there. We shared workspace all the time, same copier, shared lunch spaces and a variety of things. So we were together, we were running into each other all the time, literally. And there was a young lady there that was new to the area, and I began just to build a relationship with her. It was fun at the Puckspod. They regularly would have happy hour, so everybody would go down and share beverages. And so I would go down and sit with everybody and enjoy the company of others. I didn't have to go try to create a block party. I mean, it just always was there, which was very convenient. So anyway, you're sitting there looking for things to talk about with people you don't know, and eventually you get to know them. But this one gal, I kind of struck up a friendship with her, and so I would talk to her often. And then as I began to feel a little more safe in our relationship, I started to share about Christ and kind of really trying to figure out what made life meaningful to her. Like, where did she feel like she was winning? What were some of the losses she's dealing with in life? And the relationship seemed to go in some really good places. And I felt like she was making some real good progress. I'd even got to the point where I was going to do a discovery Bible study in Puckspod, and she was going to be a part of it, and a couple other people. And then someone offered me free office space, and I took it. So I lost track of this gal for a couple years. And not too long ago, I was at the church where I attend. I go to Westside Family Church in Lenexa, Kansas. And so I walked in, and that particular day, my grandson was with me. And I said to him, he doesn't come real often. So I just said, he's 12 years old. And I said, where do you want to sit? Well, guess what he said? Like, on the very back row, of course. And they have like a floor, and then they have a balcony area. So he wanted to go to the back of the back. It's about 1,200 seat auditorium. So we're in literally the very, very back row. So we go up to the back row. It's dark, we're singing, and I look over to my left, and literally 4 seats away is this girl.
Wow.
That I've invested 2 years in. She sees me, our eyes meet, and her eyes get really big. And so as soon as the service is over, she comes running over and she gives me this great big hug. And she introduced me to her husband. She had gotten married. And she said, I accepted Jesus. And I said, oh my gosh, I was so excited. And I
Yeah.
said, oh, that is incredible. And she said to her husband, this is the guy who used to always tell me about Jesus. And she said, I can't believe we actually went into church. Well, we would have never, the chances of running into her, seeing her in the hallway would have been like slim and none probably. But because my grandson chose a different place that day, we like saw each other. And then last Sunday she got baptized. So it's like so much fun to see like they joined we call them A2 group or a community group here. And it's just so much fun to see the way that God works and changes. Like her face is just glowing. And I talked to her husband the other day. I bet we talked for half an hour after church, just about how their lives have changed and what's going on. It's so exciting.
I love that, Gary. And it's just another illustration, like the neighboring stuff. Relationships in general are the long game. And so we never know some of these investments that we make. It's incredible that you got to see that and the fruit of that pan out. And for a lot of us, we may not see that, but those seeds may be growing for a long time.
Yeah.
That's so great. I was going to ask, I was going to kind of change the subject a little bit, but are you working on a new book, or is there a way that people could learn from your experiences?
Yeah, I'm not. A lot of people ask that because you'd think Jay and I aren't really authors. We just something happened to us and we wrote it down. And when you read the book, you'll get that sense. I mean, we're just telling our story and how it impacted us and how it changed us. And then, and so for us, we have a website where we give everything away free that we can, especially for faith leaders. We call it a cheat sheet. It's basically like, we've worked with a couple thousand churches over the last 10 years, and here's what we've learned from working with churches that do this well. And so that's on the website for free. And then there's a small group resource that's on there for free.
What's your website?
It's artofneighboring.com.
Okay.
Artofneighboring.com. So if you want to see what we're learning and what we have learned, we do keep the website up to date. And so that has most of our recent learnings on it.
I stole a couple of your videos too.
Good. Good. I know a lot of people have access. A lot of people have access to Right Now Media, and we just did a 4-week series with Right Now. That if you can access that, that's free as well.
Sweet.
That's so good.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, Dave, thanks for taking the time to join us.
Oh, this was fun. I
love
what you're doing. I love the focus on neighboring. It's the answer. I mean, I'm convinced of this. When Jesus asked to boil the entire text on one thing, he's given us all a simple strategic plan that if we would just do it, it would change the world overnight. If every believer in our country just started to think about, like, there's something sacred happening right outside my door, that what I do in my front yard counts. It's real ministry. It's just like serving on the elder board, or it's just like serving with the kids, and those are all important things. But so is what we do in our front yards. And so I think I love the message that you're carrying to others is the real deal. And so keep up all the great work.
Thanks so much. In Kansas City, we're really excited because we're seeing just steady growth. So there's 3,200 people in Kansas City who've adopted their neighborhoods through Bless Every Home. And there's probably more, that we don't know about, I'm sure. But growing at about 63 a month on average. And that's been really constant. In fact, when COVID hit, there was actually an uptick. I think because people were thinking, hey, people maybe who were doing more traditional type of serving, I'm serving in the nursery, I'm serving in the parking lot, or I'm serving somewhere. All of a sudden they were at home. They began to think about their neighbors. And that's, very cool because we saw that uptick. But it's just exciting to think about what God is doing. And I always think it's simple, that it's scalable, anybody can do it. Like, it is the way to reach our world for Jesus.
Yep, I agree.
Brookie,
well, it's been great to be with both of you, Brookie and Gary. And so let me know if there's anything I can do to help out in the future.
Thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. So thank you so much for making the time to come on.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah. And to those of you who may just be checking out Love KC, lovekc.net is the website. You can, if you wanted to become a light in Kansas City, you could go to blesseveryhome.com/lovekc. and then we could work together to reach the city for Jesus. But Dave, thanks again. God bless you. To all of you who are listening, join Jesus where he's already at work, where you live, learn, work, and play.
Thank you for listening from the folks at Love KC. We hope you enjoyed our program. See you next time.